Jeff Abramowitz. And there we go. We are recorded now. Good morning, everybody. My name is Jeff Abramowitz. I'm an executive director of reentry services at Jebs Human Services in Philadelphia. And I am really excited to be here. There's a lot of topics I speak around the country, as you'll hear later on. And this particular topic on digital literacy and access in our justice systems and education is such a passion of mine that we are going to talk about a lot of things. So I want to set some ground rules. And the first is a really simple one, is that please, if you have a question, put it in the chat box, unmute yourself, put your picture up, jump in and ask away. Even if I'm in the pre-sentence or mid-sentence or wherever I am, it doesn't matter. I get really frustrated when I attend workshops and listen to people talk, and they come up with these great pieces of information, and all of a sudden I have this great question and it falls away and goes away. And at the end of the talk, I'm like, oh my gosh, what would I want to ask? So if you have a question, throw it in the chat box, and that'd be awesome. Second thing is, as you're going to hear, you are going to be provided with a wealth of information, more data and statistics and resources than you could possibly copy or write down in the hour that I have with you. So I'm going to ask you, please don't worry about them. I will share the deck with you. And Chuck has assured me that he will make sure everyone gets it that wants it. And my information's on here, so you can email me at the end and feel free to, and I'll send it to you. But there's a lot of information, including links to things that I want you to have. And I don't want you to feel that you need to keep pace, because I do talk fast in the sense that I like to get through a lot of what I'm talking about. And my slide deck often doesn't reflect the way the talk goes. Sometimes I pivot and go different ways, and we're going to have some fun. So buckle up today. And I want to start my presentation off today and this talk off with a really simple thing. Questions and answers. I know, I'm backwards. Yeah, usually you wait for Q&A at the very end, right? And I want to start with questions and answers. So I have some questions for you. This is the way my game works. Some questions for you. And I'm curious if you could throw into the chat box for me a little bit about what you do, because it's good for me to know, like, this is a technology and adult education conference. And I'm curious, who am I talking to? So if you can, take a second and throw in the chat box what you do. GED teacher, inside of prison, outside of prison, reentry program, adult literacy educator, administrator, whatever you do. Let's take a second and just throw it into chat box real quick. Everybody up for that? It also makes me see who's actually paying attention now.
No.
At the very beginning.
Where is the chat box?
Okay, I don't have anybody adding in yet. There we go. Now they're coming through. All right, we got adult ed, we have family practitioner, literacy practitioner, professional development, HSC, AP. Awesome. Good morning, adult ed advisory for PA. Cool. All right. So we got a lot of people in adult education space. Part-time GED prison instructor, ESL instructor, community. Perfect. Good stuff. Okay. So thank you, everybody. York County Prison administered GED exam. Boy, do I got some stories for you today. All right. So welcome, everybody. And thanks for sharing. Again, I'll be checking on the chat box from day to day. So the challenge for today is that I'd like you to think about our experiences building bridges. Education, to me, in my eyes, is all about building bridges, and it's building bridges to connect people that are justice involved on their journey into the future and moving forward. And I think a lot about the analogy of building bridges because, a strong bridge, like here in Philadelphia, the Ben Franklin Bridge or Walt Whitman Bridge, is really strong, carries a lot of people, has a lot of resources, and it takes you someplace, right? It takes you across the water, really challenging places, sometimes to navigate the water by boat, and it gets you to that part of your journey, what's going to be the next step. So I want you to think about the bridges that you're going to be building today and also in the work that you do. And I guess in order for you to understand the bridges, first you need to know a little bit about the person that's helping you build the bridge today, and that's myself. So I do wear a very different pair of glasses today than many people, even on this call. And, and I share the story, and I'm very transparent about my background and where I've been. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about my story, and then you're going to understand in the context of what we talk about today, where the glasses are that I wear, because I do wear these new glasses. They are new and improved. I was born in Philadelphia, and I was a trial lawyer here in the city for a little over 20 years. I practiced civil trial work, and I spent my days in the courtroom, practiced in state courts and federal courts, and also before the United States Supreme Court in Washington. And about 10 years ago, a little over 10 years ago, made some really horrible choices in life, and ended up being served an indictment, and that indictment it put me into prison. They say that the two most important days of your life are the day you're born, and people often say the day you die. And I would say the second most important day of your life is the day you figure out why you're born. And for me, that happened, and I could tell you down to the second. It was March 9th, 2012. And I stood in a courtroom in Philadelphia, and I stood in front of a judge and a packed courtroom of media and others, colleagues and judges. And I stood there not as an attorney. I stood there as a defendant. And for the first time in my life, and certainly first time in my life, I actually entered the prison system and was remanded right from the courtroom into a holding cell where I was stripped of everything. And my first impressions, memories of being in prison, which is not that long ago, I've been home a little over 5 years, was that I just remember being stripped of everything and had everything, including everything that was precious to me, my family, my belongings, my houses and cars, and everything that I considered important to me, taken away. So I knew there was two things I needed to do. One was figure out why it happened, so it never happened again. And two was figure out what the bigger picture was. What did I need to see? And at that time, that moment in time, I made a promise to myself that I was going to do everything I could to understand and see the world differently. And once I got inside of prison, I realized that there were more and more things that I found were important for me to understand. And I became like this sponge that I needed to understand everything. I needed to see everything. I really needed to engage in a way that I never had before. And I started reading voraciously and read over 1,000 books while I was away. I started teaching everything from GED math to public speaking to business startup to all these classes inside of the prisons, because there just wasn't very much offered in the federal system where I was. And then I started learning things, operating a forklift and working in a warehouse and changing oil on a car and doing all these things that I never could have possibly have imagined myself doing in my prior life. So I did my time and spent my years away and really learned a lot from the men that I was with, from the correctional officers I was with, from the educators that I was with, and came back to Philadelphia. And was homeless. It was a little over 5 years ago today that I lived in a shelter and began to try to figure out what I was going to do. Living in the halfway house system was a challenge, but I was blessed. I came home with about $22.68. And I really began to figure out what I needed to do next. And that meant actually going out looking for a job and understanding how to use an iPhone and getting on a computer and doing things I hadn't done for a bit. So I got blessed because I was walking at Broad and Lehigh in Philadelphia and went into a small agency which had a sign out, said GED math on it, or GED services, and walked inside and I pled for a job. And they gave me a job teaching GED math at minimum wage. And I quickly, within several months, became a director of workforce development for Community Learning Center, which is now Beyond Literacy in Philadelphia. It's one of the largest Title II agencies in Philly. And my career took off after that. I started doing more and more reentry programming and work with adult literacy and learning, and gradually started taking more and more positions. Got an offer from the Attorney General's office to chair the employment subcommittee for the Pennsylvania Reentry Coalition or Reentry Council. I took a seat a few years ago on the Pennsylvania Workforce Development Board. I began doing reentry programming in Philadelphia, starting a bunch of different programs, working through the CareerLink system that we had. And about 3 years ago, a little over 3 years ago, I took a job here at JEVS Human Services, which is this amazing human social service agency that operates the CareerLink in Philadelphia. We have a home health care network. We operate the contract vocational training contract up in the Philadelphia prisons. We do DOC work as well. We have a home health care network. We have 2 methadone clinics. We own Orleans Technical College up in Philadelphia, and a whole bunch of 45 different other programs that we oversee, including a SNAP 50/50 and EARN program. So I'm blessed to be here. As you can see, my journey has been remarkable. The same day I got hired by JEVS, I received a call from COABE, the Coalition on Adult Basic Education, and was asked to chair the prison literacy committee there. And I did that for the last 3 years, recently moved on from that because I was elected as secretary of the board of directors for COABE. If you're not a member of COABE, jump in. It's the Coalition on Adult Basic Education, COABE. It's the advocacy arm for adult educators and administrators across the country. Tremendous organization, wonderful resources. And more and more has happened. Started working with the Barbara Bush Foundation and Google and a whole bunch of great partners that I work with, including SHRM. And within the last 6 months, took a job with I'm still working here at JEVS, but part-time, working on some projects with the U.S. Department of Education as a subject matter expert on correctional education and reentry. And now I oversee and the moderator for INLINCS, LINCS, which is the community of practice for correctional education and reentry. And the list goes on so much. And so many things that I'm so proud of that I've done, but it's all with a passion and purpose that I've never had before. And it's also about the glasses that I wear. So now it gives you some context of where I've been and what we're going to be talking about today. So the issue today is really about digital literacy and some things that you need to understand as we go and we build this bridge and understand the challenges. I want to set the stage a little bit. Don't worry about the volume of the data that you're going to be seeing, but it's all be shared, so you'll make sure you have it. So we should understand that we are by far the most incarcerated country in the world. We have well over 2 million individuals that are incarcerated in our prison systems, about 1.3 in state prisons, 650,000 in our local jails, and about 200, maybe 185,000 in our federal system. But there's no question that the per capita, we just haven't figured out yet our justice system and our forms of incarceration and how to deal with mass incarceration. We do have about 3.74 million people on probation and parole. And we have about 500,000 people that are currently incarcerated, but have not been convicted yet. They're incarcerated strictly because they cannot afford bail. Our bail system is just incredible. We have 113 million people in our country have an immediate family member that have been incarcerated. And that's about half of the adult population in the United States. So the numbers are more staggering when we look at 70 to 100 million people in the United States currently have a criminal history. And that criminal history you need to recognize comes with a charge. Once you're arrested and a charge is filed, a criminal history begins and you enter in the database. So it's if you go to a fast food market or you're in the shopping market or in a grocery store or gas station and a person in front of you, maybe there's 2 or 3 people in front of you, the chances are that either they have been incarcerated or know someone that has been incarcerated. Kind of remarkable.
Hey, Jeff.
Yes.
Hey, sorry to interrupt. Should we be seeing this on the slides?
Yes, you should.
Okay, it doesn't look like the slides are advancing.
Okay, hold on. Let's make sure we get you there.
You might need to go into, I don't think it's in presenter mode right now. I don't know if that's the issue.
Let's try this again. Thanks for interrupting. I could have gone through all this and that would have been, can you see it now?
No.
How about now?
Okay, now we see, do you have two screens?
Yes.
I think you need to share your other screen and then I think we'll be good.
Okay, let's do that then. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, it's okay.
I'm
I
glad you
mess this
stopped me.
stuff up all the time.
Let's try this again.
Perfect. Let's see.
Nope.
Yeah, now we just see the PowerPoint.
Hmm.
Oh, if you try the present online, that might do it. Oh, no, it won't. Sorry.
Oh, let's try this again. Hold on. I thought we had it before.
Yeah, I think when you tried it, when it was before people even joined, I think that it looked right.
How's that?
I think that'll work. Okay, we see the screen like with a black background and then the slide on the left and then the next slide on the right, like as a smaller slide. But I think people can see what you're showing them.
Okay.
Does that work okay for people, for everyone on?
Is that what you're saying? You see the screen, you just see a slide deck on the side.
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, yeah, let's go with that because then they'll get a good idea. They may see in advance, but then they'll know where we're headed. So I'm okay with that. If everybody's okay with that.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you so much. Thanks for bringing that up. I appreciate it.
Oh,
So
yeah,
we're
no problem.
talking, yeah. So we're talking a little bit about the data and the numbers of people that are incarcerated. So we release in our prison system every year about 636,000 men and women come out from across the country. And the tragedy is that more than 2/3 of those released are going to get rearrested within 3 years, and about half are going to find their way back to prison. And I do believe it's important for us to look at these numbers because Albert Einstein had a great line. I put it up there. A person without data is just another person with an opinion. And I think that's kind of true, huh? When we talk about digital literacy, you should know that 1 in 3 American workers have limited or no digital literacy skills. And this was published in the National Skills Coalition paper from April 21st of 2020. So it's not that long ago, right? 1 in 3 American workers. And I'm not talking about people incarcerated. I'm talking about American workers in all of our country. 1 in 3 have low digital literacy skills. So we need to understand the context of that as well. When we talk about low literacy in our country, generally, we lose about $2.2 trillion in gross national product because of low literacy levels. And again, not just for people that are incarcerated, but 781 million people in the world are either illiterate, cannot read a single word, or functionally illiterate, which means they have a very low basic reading level. 54% of the US population, that's 130 million people, lack proficiency in literacy. That's a 6th grade level. And we have about 22 million people in the US that are without a high school diploma. And that's about 63%. This is about 63% of all jobs in the United States require a high school diploma. So the impact that low literacy has, not just inside of our prison, but outside of our prison, is so impactful when we talk about our country, especially in today's world, and navigating what comes after a pandemic and how we deal with that. So why is adult education so important, especially when we talk about the justice systems and people that are involved in justice? And it's important because low-skilled adults, low-skilled learners are really 8 times more likely to be incarcerated. And we know as a fact that if you take just one class inside of a prison or jail, that you're 43% more likely not to go back. Now that's so amazing because that data, and we're going to talk about this in a minute, has been around for a while, and yet we still haven't figured out what the secret sauce is. By 2021, 63% of all jobs, that's this year, will require an education beyond a high school diploma. So you can see the impact for men and women traveling through our justice systems. Education and skill development are so crucial to us understanding how we can help men and women that are coming home from our prison systems. You know, the reality is that 94% plus are going to come home someday. They're going to be released from prison. And if we don't do something to help them navigate what their next step is, I don't think it's really rocket science as to what's going to happen next. But no question that people, men and women that do programming inside of the walls, that they definitely have a higher literacy and numeracy level than those people that don't. And yet only about 23% of those people that are behind our walls actually engage in programming. And that's kind of tragic when you think about it. The state of digital literacy today, as I just said, in our prison systems is kind of sad in the sense that we've known since roughly October 2015 with a study that digital literacy reduces recidivism. So I have, and I've put in in my material today, that in 2011, it's actually 4 years before that, a study was done by Pew that found that 10 states alone had reduced their recidivism rates by 10%. So that 66% went down 10% less. And that it saved the states literally $470 million per year by having some type of digital literacy support inside of the walls. Now, think about that. If we were to look at a 10-year window and take $470 million that we could have saved in one state, just one state, and we added that up over a 10-year period, we could have built in Wi-Fi and computers into every single cell in every prison in our country for that amount of money. So billions of dollars we've lost because we just haven't listened to the message that's coming across. Digital literacy and computer literacy is crucial for men and women navigating our prisons and coming home, as well as those that are traveling through our system. So the impact of digital literacy is very wide reaching, and you should understand really what it means. So I was in a federal prison where the only computers we had were for emailing and email. Yeah, I think email was the only thing we could do to email our families. And we really didn't have access to any other computers, certainly no internet, certainly no Microsoft Word, no other programming. There were probably 3 computers in the room that we were allowed into to email our families. And even our GED programs, we were teaching them in the classroom, math and reading and get ready for GED, but yet when they went to take the exam, it was all online. So it was kind of bizarre because, we're teaching by book and we're teaching them, to do basic math skills and reading comprehension skills and all those things. And then we go to take the test, and it would often be the first time that they even saw a computer and were instructed on this time basis to cut and paste something or click and navigate the computer, where maybe they hadn't done it for years for many men that I was with. So there were definitely challenges inside of the prison when it came to using, even emailing was a challenge for many men that I was with. But having digital literacy support inside of prisons changes things. It does. The first thing it does is it gives them a life skill. It gives them a life skill to understand what's going to happen when they get out. And it's crucial even with employment. We're going to talk about that in a little bit, the employment aspect of it. We task people the second they come home, you get into the halfway house, go get a job and go over there, get on the computer, start applying for jobs. And they're looking at the mouse like it's a foreign object because they just don't know how to navigate it, how to move around, and how to cut and paste something, or how to save a document, or God gosh, don't tell them what a USB is because they're really going to get confused now. But those basic life skills are with everything. I mean, you can't, get your banking is now online. Your, a credit card is online. I mean, just everything you can imagine in your daily life that you go through, even going to a convenience store sometimes and having to put your Gmail or email account in are pose challenges. So you learn digital literacy, you learn basic skills for life inside before you're getting out. There's also the other consequence I want to talk to you about. The impact of digital literacy also, it creates this gateway for engaging disenfranchised learners. So many people, no question, many people in our system are Black and brown. There are 1 in 3 Black males will find themselves incarcerated during their lifetime or touched by the justice system. Remarkable. 1 in 6 Latino men. And the population for the incarcerated population for women is ever growing and increasing. And what you need to be mindful of is that, those there are many people that have been disenfranchised by the education systems. They may have started inside of a school and then left school early or didn't even complete or never went because they had challenges in their neighborhoods or places where they were supposed to get learning. They had really negative experiences in their childhood from going to school. And now it's giving them an opportunity to kind of make it up, to get back in the game. On-demand and independent learning is an incredible advantage for many people because now they can learn at their own pace and they can learn in an environment where they don't have to worry about being ridiculed or being subject to peer pressure or those kinds of things. And it also brings people together. Inside of prison, there's a tremendous isolation that you have, and your new family are the men or women that you live with and that you work with. But it tends to bring people together where it creates this relationship. I can't tell you how many men that I worked with one-on-one just to help them navigate a challenge that they had, whether it was learning how to public speak or learned how to, to do math problems or, the Pythagorean theorem. And that bond was pretty remarkable because I made some tremendous friendships with people and I learned more from them than they probably ever learned from me. So the creation of relationships. There's also a mental aspect of it. I came out of prison and I will tell you that my mental health was and remains as sharp, if not sharper, than any best day that I had in a courtroom as a trial lawyer. I've just had the opportunity to learn so much and continue to learn so much, but it also really gave me an opportunity to concentrate on physical health, and my overall health began to improve as well. I lost a lot of weight inside of prison. I became sharper. I became more aware of things around me, and had this now self-awareness of how to listen better and how to pick up things and read with reading between the lines, not just reading the words on the lines. And then there's also this innate thing that happens inside of prisons with digital literacy where it becomes easier to track progress with individuals. There are 2/3 of men and women that are in prisons have some kind of disability. It could be physical, it could be addiction issues, behavioral health issues, socioeconomic issues. I mean, there's so many different kinds of issues that fall into the disability realm. But learning disabilities is one big one. And oftentimes people that are challenged in our justice systems and education classrooms have a learning disability that's gone undiagnosed. And it gives us an opportunity to really see that and maybe nurture it and help it so that we can make things a little bit better. And then the other aspect of it is it does create a safer environment for people that are in the prison system. And that's kind of really important to understand. The dynamic changed the second that I entered prison and started teaching to from when it was before. It took a little while, and over the few months that I was there and started teaching classes and started getting approval for classes, what I noticed were that the classes went from 2 the first week or 2 to 10 to 15 to 20. And then all of a sudden, people were starting engaged and they started to ask for other programming, and they wanted to learn more, and they wanted to figure out what, let's run a CDL class. And so I taught a CDL class inside, which is kind of funny because I never drove a tractor trailer in my life. But what I did realize that the men that I was with, they couldn't pass the test. they couldn't pass whatever math there was, whatever reading comprehension skills. Just understanding how to take a test in and of itself was a journey. And I taught a CDL class where I taught the class. It's kind of the IET model, which we'll talk about, where there was I instructed on how to take the test, and somebody stood right next to me and they told them, the truck drivers that I was with, how to operate the truck and things they needed to know and all those tricks of the trade. And the environment of prison changed. It's well documented that inside of prison, when you have a robust educational program, that there's less fighting, that there's less time for men to do bad things, and that people are more directed, and they find more purpose because now they start thinking about what they're going to do when they get out at an earlier stage. You know, reentry to me begins the very first day of incarceration. And I don't believe that you return to prison. You start preparing yourself the day you come out. You start preparing yourself the day you go in. And thank God that I did some of those things, because I was able to actually send for my driver's license renewal. And I was down 5 years, and do things like making sure my birth certificate was in a safe place and my social security card was with me, and had all those things that I needed when I got out. So I tried to stay ahead of the game, and found some challenges with it, but I did, and that was important for me, and one of the things that I tried to impress upon the men and women that I've worked with. So one of the things we should know here, even here in Pennsylvania, that we spend more on our prison systems than we do on public schools. Kind of crazy. In Pennsylvania, we're 13th in the country. We spend about $15,000 per student on education per year, and yet we spend $42,000 to keep an inmate housed in our correctional system. And this correlates to the staggering reality that, you know, there are so many barriers when people come home from prison. And one of those, there are many, there are documented over 44,000 of those barriers, but in a recent study, which I've attached to my material, about 70% of those barriers that people face are related to education, to employment. They're related to employment. They're related to getting back to work. And this is pre-COVID. Generally, the unemployment rate for people that were formerly incarcerated is 27%. Now, that's higher than the peak of the Great Depression. And just to put it in context, we're between 8 and 9% now. And we've just gotten done we're coming out of a pandemic. And yet there's so many challenges for people going through our justice systems, but employment is by far the biggest one. And a lot of that is circled around the reality that education is in such that we just don't do enough to support people with building those bridges for education. And the building bridges and starting at the beginning, you know, basic math and reading support, helping people find high school equivalency and their GED, getting them that accomplishment or that achievement. Digital literacy, we're going to talk more about it, but, you know, upskilling. You know, people go through and they get their high school diploma, but even me, I started teaching GED math inside of prison and when I came home. But the big thing that I had to do was I had to go back and remember, gosh, I hadn't done Pythagorean theorem. I hadn't done fractions, multiplication or division of fractions since I was in high school, when I was like, oh my gosh, I got to go learn this all over again. And I did. I spent some time really figuring out, you know, basic math and reading, and then understanding the importance of correctional career and technical education and how to build that into your pathway and to choose wisely. The two men in the picture that I have up are both men that I've helped since they've come home. One was a veteran that came back and was challenged with some of the trauma of being a veteran and started on drugs that led him really into addiction and then into the justice system, and came home, started working with some of the programming that I have, the reentry programming, and now is a site supervisor for a major demolition company. And the other is a CDL driver now. Just amazing. But men come home and they have a passion in their belly. They get this skill set that they want to find what their next place in life is, their next journey. So COVID,
Hey, Jeff.
Yep.
I'm sorry. I think we're behind on the slides a little bit again. I'm not seeing the men that you're describing.
Oh, okay. Can you see that?
I see the 636,000 citizens are released
Yeah,
each
you
year.
guys are way behind. How's that now? You can catching up?
Yes. Yep.
All
Now it's
right,
moving.
there we go. All
Awesome.
right,
Thanks.
there's the two men.
Okay. Thanks.
Thank you. So again, the COVID pivot and things that have changed in COVID have really been very, very significant, because we know that inside of our prisons, much has changed. In that, we were locked down. Our prisons were, essentially they were, they were shut down because of their petri dish. We had a lot of spread of virus inside, and there was a lot of precautions which required us to really lock men and women inside of their cells for a period of time, and that included outside as well. There was I had heard a statistic from Secretary Wetzel. I was with him not too long ago. I think it's changed probably since our last conversation, but he mentioned that you were 3 times more likely to get COVID outside of prison than you were inside of prison last year. And the reality for that, it's kind of an incredible statistic, but the reality for that was that men and women were coming home, they were being released from prison, and there were very few support services and systems that were in place as people navigated the outside of prison as they came home. So the challenges for people during COVID were incredible, but there was also a lot of lack of programming. People weren't coming inside. We weren't having tutoring programs. Heck, our education programs were often shut down completely. I mean, some places went on to paper, and some are starting now to kind of get back into a blended setting. But the one thing that happened was a lot of nothing. We weren't doing a lot of support and a lot of education support, certainly digital literacy support, and all those things behind the walls came to this dramatic halt and put us really behind, especially for people that were navigating their coming home, their eventual release. Inside of, there's a great website, if you're not familiar with the Marshall Project, but you should check it out. But inside of our prisons, there's about 397 as of a few days ago, people that had gotten COVID-19. In Pennsylvania, we had 11,000 men and women that were infected, and we had that's about 2,400 per 10,000 prisoner, but about 11,000 people were infected. The Marshall Project actually keeps this data all the time. So it keeps a running tab of all the prisons in our country in the federal system. So we can see a little bit about the impact of COVID-19 on our prisons. And what ended up happening were prisons started pivoting a little bit too. They started doing a lot more environmental cleaning, and some places started making masks and doing different things. But programming really took a back seat to healthcare, and as it should. But there needed to be a system in place that allowed for us to understand how we could do both, how we could provide services. And had we had the ability to even have more active tablet systems in our prisons, then maybe it would have been a little bit different, and men could have at least continued to gain educational support while they were there. This also caused us to look at the priority sectors that men and women would be starting to target and looking into. Our job market now, there's way more jobs than there are people willing to take them. And an interesting article in the Washington Post a few weeks ago, the article talked about the reality that there were, there's a question about this lack of employment or lack of employees that are willing to go back out in the talent pool, and how it's really reduced. And it really isn't about a lack of people out there that wanting to work. What's happened is actually, in the way they describe it, is a lot of people have looked at what they were doing prior to COVID and said, you know what, I want to do something different. So I want to change my job sector. I want to do something, and I'm done doing what I was doing. I want to now do this. And so we're seeing a lot of people that are entering the market now that are entering into a different world. And some sectors are not yet opened up or just starting to open up. I was at a job fair yesterday with a restaurant here in Philadelphia that needs 68 employees immediately. And we just can't get men and women that want to work in the restaurant setting right now. A lot of those employees are looking for other alternatives. And then the reality is some are just collecting unemployment until it runs out and trying to gain some momentum before they get back into COVID. I do believe that a lot of the things that we're doing when we talk about, preparing people for coming home in the education space and digital literacy space can't be looked at in a vacuum. There are many of these beams of support that happen: housing, education, skill development and training when they get home, medical support, basic needs like clothing and transportation and even legal support, all have to be thought about. When we build that bridge to get people across it, it can't just be we need to get them smarter. It can't just be we need to give them skills, which we do. It can't just be that we need to give them home, because there's all these wrap around together. And the sooner we understand that this is a holistic approach, that it takes a village, it's going to take a village for us to help men and women coming home, I think the better off we're going to be in understanding how we need to support and help people. Giving someone a job oftentimes can be one of the worst things that can happen if they don't have the skill to do the job, if they have all these other supports that they need, or if they really are not in a position where they can advance and they can get that career opportunity or prepare themselves to advance. So what can be done, and what do we need to make our bridge stronger? Well, digital literacy and competency is obviously very, very important, but blending it with some other things that can be on our radar screen. For example, we should be thinking about blended learning programs, doing a program where maybe, men and women that are behind the walls are doing a little bit of work in the classroom and with a live instructor, and then they're doing stuff in their units during the afternoon. And those blended learning programs where, there's both online component and also a classroom component. Virtual computer centers and classrooms, we have this security idea in our head that we can't do this safely. And so one of the biggest arguments that we hear is, well, we can't do this safely because it's a security risk. And I understand security is of utmost concern in our facilities, and I get that. But there are so many virtual settings, and the technology is there to do this safely now, that I don't believe it's an answer anymore. It's an excuse. It's an excuse. There are international partners around the country that now create these prison clouds where data sits in in this cloud where it's brought down, and there's not direct access. An inmate or a justice involved individual is seeing exactly what you want them to see, and not accessing everything on the internet, but they're only getting their whitelisted sites so that they can be protected. And then cell phone technology on the outside. I remember when I first got my cell phone, for the first few weeks, I was taking a bunch of pictures, and I asked my daughter to show me how I could pull them up and kind of go through them. And for a good few days, I was taking selfies because I didn't realize that you had to press the little button to turn the camera lens around on the camera. And I know it sounds silly, but when people don't have that technology, have never used it before, it takes some time to get used to understand it. There was one gentleman I worked with last week who had been down 30 years, and he kept asking me for my pack. And I was like, my pack? What are you talking about? So before he went in, he was aware that there was the cell phone had this battery pack that used to carry around with you on your shoulder, and that's what you use. And I was like, oh man, that's long gone. But anyone that's that's a little bit older remembers those days. Things have changed, but we haven't kept up with our international partners in doing programming inside. And some facilities across the country, across the world, are actually hardwiring each cell, so that every cell has hard access to computers, so that people can take online classes. They can take, the wealth of free programming that's on it's in our computers today and available. I don't believe the answer is just in thinking outside the cell. I think you need to be outside the cell. And that's thinking about innovations in teaching, blended learning programs, bringing in better materials, bringing in incentives for if men and women complete certain classes or reach certain bars, that we incentivize them so that they get some benefits. Let me tell you something. When I was inside the prison, the biggest incentive that men often got was just a bag of candy. because quite frankly, we didn't have very much inside. And every so often, if you accomplished a goal, you got your GED, you get this bag of candy, and it was cherished. Now, some people traded it and bartered it, which was fine, but the incentives are really important. Virtual learning tools, we should think about virtual reality, and the virtual reality could be an amazing tool inside of our prisons where we don't have to bring in welding equipment. We can do it by virtual reality. Truck driving, forklift operation. Heck, I was on a OSHA site and a construction site, and I was on the 60th floor in a virtual setting. And very recently, because we're trying to blend this into a program, and I hit my head on a steel beam I was pulling into place and fell 60 stories to my death. But it was real. It was very real to me, and it was a learning experience. It could be an incredible tool. Digital literacy supports, different ways that we can teach people. And there are a lot of different tools that are out there. Recently, Google has launched a platform about 2 weeks ago, week and a half ago, for returning citizens, completely free. And the link is attached. But if you just put in Google and reentry, there's a whole platform on helping returning citizens get back to, get career opportunities and also get digital literacy skills. Really incredible. IBM also has this IBM Skills Build initiative, totally free, but awesome free tools for men and women that are justice involved. Inside Out connectors, connecting people with not only employers, but also resources. I work with a company, a nonprofit called PD Green, which does tutoring inside of our prisons, a remarkable program. But it does a few things. They pivoted during COVID, and we did a lot of tutoring virtually and set them up on our Zoom links and things, but thinking differently. So I mentioned to you that I'm doing some work with the Department of Education on IET. So an IET is an integrated educational training. That's where you have someone teaching fractions in a classroom, and right next to them is the carpenter, and he's teaching carpentry. And they're learning the skill at the time that they're learning the math. And that's kind of awesome. So those IET and corrections were recently launched. I don't think Pennsylvania applied for the three piloted program going on across the country. There's 6 states that were actually selected, and they'll be getting coaching and intensive technical assistance over the next year while they launch some of these programs. But if you're not familiar with an IET in corrections, you should check and see what programs in Pennsylvania may be a good fit for that blended kind of program. And it is WIOA funded, so which is kind of cool. So you should look at ways that you can actually get some funding support for it through our WIOA system. And then obviously the Pell Grant. The Pell Grant window, if you had told me years ago that Pell Grant window would have opened up again, I'd say you're crazy. But now Pell Grant's back in play, and it was approved. It's going to take about 2 years to get in, but I recently was in a conversation in Washington where we're trying to move Pell Grant window sooner. And there's a big movement in Congress now to move that Pell Grant window up so that we could start providing post-secondary support, financial support for people in a more productive way sooner. So we don't have to wait the 2 years. So we talk about skill development, restoring the Pell Grant, obviously an important piece. Employer engagement and getting employers involved and upskilling, and also this training component of getting people into ITAs, individual training accounts, and skills training and teaching them the basics is important. I threw this picture in because it's I was at a place called Edwin's in Cleveland before the COVID struck, and I was Edwin's is a 5-star restaurant in Cleveland, Ohio, and I had dinner there. The unique thing about this restaurant, it's all operated and run by men and women that have been justice involved. And this picture that I have here was a gentleman that made bananas Foster for us after the meal and for dessert. And I hadn't had bananas Foster in I don't know, decades, but it was interesting because it was in fact the best bananas Foster I think I've ever had. But more importantly, the smile on the gentleman's face when he got done was of such accomplishment that if there was some way that I could possibly share that or have that on every single student that I ever work with. That would be my ultimate goal, because he definitely had this accomplishment that he was so proud of as he made that dessert for us, and definitely had a skill in a trade that had his career. Building the bridges that we have involves many partners, and it means also keeping the traffic going. And keeping the traffic going means doing a lot of different things. Obviously, adult literacy and basic GED support and ABE support is important. Career one-stops and your career links throughout Pennsylvania are grand resources for men and women coming home. Same with community colleges. Apprenticeships are kind of a unique thing that are just so underutilized in our Commonwealth, that we should look at building out some more apprenticeship opportunities where people can work and feed their families at the same time that they're getting training and a career pathway. Employers, engaging employers and unions and workforce development boards. Those are all really key pieces of getting people to advance. The National Skills Coalition wrote this, had this study that came out recently, and I mentioned it to you about 1 in 3 Americans. What was more interesting about it were some of the sectors that over half of the men and women that are in our construction, transportation, and storage sectors have little to no or limited digital literacy skills. 50%. 36% of hospitality workers have little digital literacy skills. 37% workers in retail space, and 35% of workers in manufacturing. It's crazy, but this data and these statistics, it's no wonder why we are facing this tremendous skills gap, because we just haven't relied upon all of our partners to kind of sit down and say, okay, how do we fix this? How do we get them trained and skilled and build up so that we can take it to that next level, that next place we need to go? Incredible. So there's a whole bunch of resources. We have some time, so I want to talk a little bit more about some issues that are really high on my radar screen when it comes to digital literacy and skill development. One of the things I wanted to mention was a great article that I came across. It's called Do's and Don'ts of Virtual Education in Prison. And it really lays out the issues extremely well of what it's like to teach inside of a prison, and also what it's like to support men and women as they come home. And it talks about the different types of learning that goes on, the asynchronous classes that can happen, as well as the blended learning or the flipped learning that should be occurring, and also the e-learning and the technology that's out there. And what's being done in other states. So I commend you to read. I attached the link in the resource material that we have as well. And then some of the other things that have been really interesting are there's a study that was done in 2020 by Noah Friedman called The Gold Standard for Correctional Education and Technology. And I had the privilege of working with Noah and the Barbara Bush Foundation recently on some of these issues. And he actually started diving into correctional education and technology, and the importance of it, and also what the standard of best practices are. So I'd encourage you to take a look at some of that. And then most recently, Barbara Bush Foundation printed out had their report that came out, and also a good friend wrote an article on how to unlock the power of prison education. So there's a lot of material. Some of the things that I think would be really incredible if you really took a look at are things like the SHRM, Getting Talent Back to Work, which is a website that is actually a 10-course module on how to get people back to work and what employers are looking at, what are the challenges that they're seeing, and teaching you what the law is a little bit, and a lot of bit of how you can help people overcome those barriers. Just a little promo here for myself. I am the moderator for Links, Correctional and Reentry Community of Practice. And if you're not on Links, it's a free resource and it's awesome. It's links.ed.gov. And if you go on, there's career pathways in there also, which is kind of a great resource tool. But go on there, join the community of practice. There's some great webinars and a lot of resources, a ton of resources and materials that you can take a dive through. I also gave you the link for Google Reentry Career Preparedness Program, the IBM Skills Initiative that's out there, and obviously the do's and don'ts for virtual reality or virtual programming that's there. So I put in my contact information. We have a few minutes, so I want to open the floor up for a little bit. I talked a lot and gave you a lot of information, and I apologize for any slide technology. I'm still kind of picking up some of this, but I will send you the full slide deck so you have it and you can walk through it. I do want to open the floor and give us some space for any questions that you might have. So feel free now, jump in, unmute yourself. If you have any questions or thoughts or comments you'd like to make, now would be a good time to kind of jump in and do it. Anybody? Okay.
Hey, Jeff, this is Chuck again.
Yeah,
and everybody. Hey, I just wanted to mention Jeff had mentioned about IETs. And, I'm guessing everybody knows this, but we do have kind of like a state expert. And actually, I think she's kind of considered a national expert on the subject, in Kaylin Hamilton, who has a project kind of like ours, but they support like workforce programming and workforce education. So if anybody's interested in any support with that, you should probably reach out to Kaylin. And if you need her contact information, then you can reach out to me and I can link you up with Kaylin if need be. And also Chrissy Klinger, no relation to me, thankfully for her. She also works with Kaylin, so she'd be another good resource on that particular subject. But yeah, I just wanted to mention that since you brought that up.
Thanks, Chuck. So what's interesting is Kaylin and I are working together on the Octave project for the Department of Education. So both of us lead teams across the country. She's got several states and I have a few other states. And we also are working with Judy Mortrude, who's also a tremendous resource if you're delving into or want to dive into IETs, either in corrections or in your facilities.
Cool. Small world.
Yeah, it really is. I wanted to end with a kind of short story and really maybe more of an anecdote of anything that regarding the work that you do and understanding the work that you do as educators and as administrators in the correctional education and reentry education space. Education for me is not only a passion, but it's a way of life. I don't believe that we can change our country and we can help people out of poverty, that we can fix some of the systemic issues that are happening in our country unless we really get people smarter and give them the opportunity to advance, to move from that entry-level position to the mid-level position, to the ownership position, to the position where they can be successful with a good pay and a 401k, and they're feeding their families. I was recently speaking across the country virtually, and somebody asked me what my data was, like how well am I doing, and I can say, well, I can tell you that pretty clear. I keep track of everything, as our agency does. But I said the truth is that the impact that we do as educators and administrators and the work that I do, it really can't be measured. And the reason for that is because it's really lies in the 5-year-old or 6-year-old that's going to school and he's got a full belly and he wears good sneakers and new clothes and he's proud of going to school and he's happy and he likes being in class and he's motivated when his mom and dad show up at parent teacher conference and he's going on and going to finish high school and going to go to college. I don't know how you place a value on that, but I know for sure that impact is priceless. And that's how we change society. That's how we make change happen. So I thank everyone that's on this call for the work that you do. And I hope and pray that someday you get to see the fruits of your labor, that you get to see the people that you're touching and understand how invaluable, how valuable the work is that you do and the services that you're providing. Because for you, the word that I often use is flossom, because you're all awesome in your own ways. And yet we have a reality like myself that we all are flawed in some ways and imperfect, and we're all on this journey together. So I wanted to thank everybody. It's 10:30. I wanted to thank everybody. I'm going to hang out for a minute or two if anybody's got any questions, but I will share the slide deck with you and be able to give you everything that I talked about today, as I promised. So thanks for joining, everybody.
Hey, thank you very much, Jeff. And just to let everybody know, the slide deck, it sounds like Jeff's willing to share it. We'll make it available on the PA Adult Ed Resources website. There's a page dedicated to this conference. So we'll have a link to you'll be able to access the recording of this session as well as the slide deck and any other materials that presenters are willing to share on that website. It'll probably take us a week or two to get that all taken care of. We'll have to close caption the recordings and things like that, but it will be available on the website. So stay tuned for that.